This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
And welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. I'm going to continue my talk on ugly pools. This is basically when you get to a pool or a new account and you just can't get the pool to clear up or turn around on you. So this is kind of a part 2. If you wanted to listen to part 1, it's the previous one to this. I'll, of course, have a link for that. It's actually a standalone episode as well because you're going to run into these problems anyway. So even if you don't hear part 1, these are some things you're going to run into with a pool that just can't be turned around. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy coaching program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support. For me, I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. So just a brief recap. I did mention in the other part about checking the filtration system. That's kind of a key thing. Also, high cyanuric acid. It's hard to turn a pool around when it's really high. You can't really keep enough chlorine in there in some cases or turn the pool around because it's turned on you and the cyanuric acid level is really high and you can't get the free chlorine to be effective in that pool. And then the other one I covered was nitrates, which is kind of a death sentence of the water. So definitely I think those are things that you want to have on your radar when you're looking at a pool that you're having trouble turning around. Here's one that you may not. I also touched briefly on leaks, and I'll cover that a little bit more detail here. But here's one that you may not think about too much, and this is something that I've run into where I've had a real head scratcher, like, hey, why isn't this pool working? Why isn't this pool looking good? Why is the water cloudy? What's going on here? I know I'm doing everything correctly. And something that you may not realize is that the pump is not running the scheduled amount of time that it is supposed to be running. And this is something that could be because the pump is overheating and turning off sometime during the day, which does happen. By the way, when it gets really hot, there's a fail-safe in there, and it will turn itself off. And you may not even realize this is happening. So this happens with really old pumps. So if you have a pool with an old pump on your service route, this could be the problem that's happening. And I've had this happen before. Usually, I don't know if you have one of these, but usually it's the Duraglass, the Stay-Right Duraglass pumps or Maxi-Glass. They were notorious for turning off during the week at some point and then turning back on once they kind of cool down. And this usually happened in hot weather, by the way, as well. So they were a problem. Another problem is also with an old pump is that it may not be really moving the water in the pool the way you think it is. Again, this happens with the older pumps. The impeller is spinning, of course, and you think it's working, but it's just not really moving the water at the speed that you would want it to. I've been doing pool service long enough to deal with brass pumps, and one thing with the brass pump is that the impeller starts to wear down a little bit. So you got to make some fine adjustments and bring the impeller a little forward, but it has the illusion of working fine, but it's just not moving the water as well. So that's something to look at too. It doesn't have to be a brass pump, of course. It can be a regular pump, and the impeller is just not working the way it's supposed to. Could be a diffuser problem as well. You may notice like some cavitation in the pump basket or some air in there. You may not. It's just one of those things where the pump is just getting old and you have to replace it. There was one in particular that I thought was really weird that I've never had this happen more than once, I think. This is the only time I've ever had noticed this happen, is that actually the impeller was actually pretty much snapped off the shaft itself, and it looked like everything was working fine. But when I took the pump apart, the impeller just came right off in my hand. It was kind of weird. So I was like, how did this pool even work? But I guess that's why it looked really bad. The water wasn't clearing up. And it was just because the impeller was pretty much snapped off and it looked like it was working. I don't know. It was weird. Maybe it snapped off when I took it apart, but that could happen too. So of course, the pump not running is a problem. A lot of times in the summer, if you have a standalone VS pump, the customer will turn off the pump without telling you, and maybe 3 or 4 days later realize it and turn the pump back on. So I've had this happen as well. So a lot of the standalone VS pumps have a start-stop on-off button, and the customer may use their pool, they'll swim, but they don't really want the pump running because, it interferes with the conversation sometimes by the pool. A lot of equipment here in California is like literally right next to the pool, so it's kind of annoying. Plus, they don't want the pump running when the kids are in there. Some people are paranoid. I get it. So they'll turn off the pump. They'll hit stop. And then, just like a Wednesday, and then maybe on a Friday they'll realize, oh, I forgot. I got to turn the pool back on. And they hit start. By then, the pool has turned a little bit, and they used the pool, they swam, and it's supposed to be running to clear that up. It hasn't been, and that could be a problem as well. And I've caught a few customers by getting to the pool and seeing the pump was stopped. And I'm like, okay, this is what's going on here. I figured out this problem. I had one member of my group in Florida where she was having so much trouble with this pool. And she's like, what is going on here? Why is this pool not looking clear every week? And she found out later, I told her, well, ask the customer, is the pool running every day? And the customer confessed to her that he didn't want to waste energy. So after about 2 hours, he would go out there, he's an older guy, and just stop the pump. And then in the evening, he would start it again so that it would just run a cycle. And really frustrating, but that was what was going on there. It was weird, and people are weird like that. I had a customer that when she was out there gardening, she would turn off the pump because she didn't like the noise of it. It was an automatic timer. She just flipped the switch off. And she would be out there gardening, of course, a lot during the week. So I actually was at the stop one day when she was out there, and I noticed the pool wasn't running, and she's like, oh yeah, I don't like the noise of it when I'm gardening, so I turn it off, and I was like, I see the problem. So what I did is I reset the timer, and I told her, hey, I didn't say hey, but, in my head, I'm reliving it here, so I'm just saying it the way I would say it in my head. I said, hey, could I just set the pump and have it come on in the evening so that it doesn't bother you when you're gardening? And she's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, go ahead and do that. So you can solve the problem in a lot of cases by just communicating. With the customers that tend to turn their pump off when they use it, I always tell them, it's okay to turn the pump off when you're using your pool. I understand. But can you make a mental note that right after the kids get out, kind of make it to it's a habit. The kids get out of the pool, you go ahead and hit stop again, and that will put the pump back in its weekly schedule. Because if it doesn't do that, it's going to have a problem, and the pool is going to maybe get algae in turn and be harder to manage. A lot of them will be like, yeah, that's perfectly fine. I'll do that. That makes sense. Another thing you can do to the customers that tend to turn their pools off when you're using it is give them a bag of the non-chlorine shock. Leslie's has a pretty good product. It's called Fresh and Clear. You can get bags of these. You can buy them in a box, and just give a customer one bag and tell them, or I'll give them several bags and say that each time after the kids use the pool, when they're finished, throw a bag of this in there and then start the pump. This will give them like a kind of a cue to start the pump up and run the pool. So I do that for customers that tend to use their pool a lot in the summer and tend to turn their pool off on me. So this is something that is a constant battle out there and something that you have to really be aware of. Another thing also, and this is something I just popped in my head that's kind of on the same thought, a lot of customers like to take their automatic cleaner out of the pool when they're using it and put it on the deck. And one thing you have to tell the customers, especially if they're new to the pool, is that if they have a suction side cleaner, and of course they pull it out, put it on a deck, and turn the pool off, that's perfectly fine because it's not going to run. But a lot of times customers will leave it on the deck all week, and then it's sucking air, and it's not in the pool, and the pool's not running. So I've had that happen many times where the customer takes their suction side cleaner, puts it out on the deck, still plugged into the side port of the pool or the skimmer, and then of course they turn the pool back on, but then the pool's not running that week. Sometimes I'll call you and say, hey, my pool's not working. You get over there and you see the cleaner on the deck. So educating the customer that the cleaner has to be back in the pool to work. They don't have to let the air out of the line. Typically, I just tell them, just throw the cleaner back in the pool when you're done using the pool if you take it out, and that'll be fine. They'll suck air for a while, but it won't be a problem, and that's something to be aware of. Another thing is if it's an old IntelliFlow pump, the alarm will go off a lot on those pumps. And if it's an older version, you have to actually manually reset it. So a lot of times the customer is not even doing anything. It's just that the pool lost its prime or something happened. Sometimes the cleaner actually comes out of the water a little bit, sucks air, and then the alarm comes on, and that just kills that pump all week. So be aware also of those older VS pumps on your route that do have that alarm function that will shut the pump off, and you have to manually restart the pump in a lot of cases with those really old VS pumps, especially the IntelliFlow pumps. Here's one that I've run into before, and this is something that, we have to buy into now in this era of pool service for the older guys, and that's high phosphates in the pool. And I had this pool, it was on the early days of phosphate treatment, and so I got a phosphate test kit, and I tested the pool, and it showed really high phosphates. I think it was like 2,000 parts per billion. I was like, wow, that's a lot of phosphates in here. I don't even know what happened to the pool. It was a new account, and the pool was always cloudy. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll do a phosphate treatment on this pool. Again, this was in the early days when I was like just kind of getting into the phosphate treatment stuff. I'm going to go on a limb and say it was about 12 years ago when I was doing this pool, and was one of the first ones I tested for phosphates. And, I got the kit. Of course, the guys at the supply counter were like, yeah, you can try this, but it's all gimmick, they didn't believe in it either. And that was, again, the dark ages of pool service. But now we know that phosphates are a real issue because everything gets put into the pool. I think I did a podcast recently on that and how phosphates are just being added to the water at the municipality to prevent rusting of the pipes, orthophosphate. And so, yeah, this pool had a lot of phosphate. So I'm like, I'm going to treat this thing with a phosphate remover. So I'm like reading the label, how to do this. Because again, this is the first time I ever used this product. So I did the treatment, cleaned the filter, and lo and behold, the pool actually looked great afterwards. I was like, hey, this actually works. So I kind of bought into it. And I do think that really high phosphates, anything over 1,000 parts per billion, is going to be a problem for you, because what's going to happen is that the chlorine's going to work really hard because you have algae, you have a pretty huge food source for algae, and you're going to always be battling this algae problem with the phosphate remover. I did some tests also. Now, phosphate remover is not an algicide, but I wanted to test it out later. I've done a lot of tests with phosphate removers. So I've had some pools that had like algae on the step area. You probably had this problem where some algae forms on the steps of the pool, and you brush it with the steel brush, but it's kind of like aggressive and it's still stuck there. I've actually taken the phosphate and dumped it right over the step area of the pool, and then like a few minutes later, I look at it and the algae actually is disappearing. It's kind of weird, and I told the people at Natural Chemistry this. They're like, yeah, it probably would work that way. In some cases, I did it in spas also with algae in the spas, and it worked. It's not an algicide, but it does seem to have an effect when I was testing it like that. And I think it's something to be aware of, that high phosphates are a problem. Now, you can actually put too much phosphate remover in the pool, so be careful here as well. And then there'll be dropout and the pool can get cloudy. So make sure you dose the pool correctly based on the phosphate test. And I've done some overdosing testing as well. I put a whole gallon of the C-Clear phosphate remover in a pool before just to see what would happen. Don't do this. It's a total disaster. I ended up cleaning the filter, I think 3 times. It was a quad D filter, luckily, so it was easy to clean. But overloading the pool on phosphate remover is also counterproductive. So make sure you dose the pool correctly for the phosphate levels you're trying to remove in the pool, and don't overdose it. PR 10,000 is a great phosphate remover for really high phosphate levels. So I would want you to use that particular product over the Natural Chemistry Phos-Free if there's a lot of phosphates in the water. Anything over 1,000 parts per billion, I would say PR 10,000 would be great. And then for anything lower than that, the Phos-Free is fine because it's pretty weak and it's something that's kind of fail-safe. You're not going to overdose the pool if the phosphate levels are under 1,000 parts per billion with the Natural Chemistry Phos-Free. So if you have a pool that you take over and you're noticing that whatever you're doing is not working, and of course you've checked the filtration, you check the cyanuric acid level, it's not super elevated, like 300 parts per million, and you've also checked all the other factors, I definitely would check the phosphate level in that pool to see if that's the problem. Because if there's a lot of phosphates in the water, that's one of the food sources, our primary food sources for algae, and algae is just going to bloom like crazy. Now, you may know that I like using enhancers in the pool, and of course the phosphate remover is going to help with that. You can also just put a Pool RX Plus in there, and it doesn't really matter what the phosphate level is. It's going to counteract that because the mineral technology will destroy the microalgae in the pool. So that's a great alternative to the phosphate treatment. If you want to do something a little simpler, just put the Pool RX Plus in there, and that will really help. And I think enhancers are really critical to prevent a lot of problems out there. Borates at 50 parts per million, the Pool RX Plus, phosphate and enzymes. They're great to help with these pools, but sometimes you have to get the pool healthy first and get it balanced and get it cleared up before you can start using the enhancers correctly. And I would recommend having the pool, at least somewhat better, not 100%, before you start using these enhancers. A couple more situations here. One would be really high combined chlorine. And the breakpoint, of course, is 10 times the combined chlorine level. So I think a photometer comes in really handy when you're dealing with a pool with really high combined chlorine. Typically, it's a pool that's really heavily used, and so you want to get an accurate total chlorine number or find out how much combined chlorine is in the pool so you can shock the pool effectively to a high level. I mean, there's some rules of thumb when you're shocking a pool. 30 to 50 parts per million is usually going to break anything, but if you really have a problem with combined chlorine, sometimes even that is not enough, and sometimes you have to do it 2 or 3 times during the week to really break that combined chlorine. Sometimes using a non-chlorine shock, like the one I mentioned earlier from Leslie's, is great. It has it's potassium based, and it does help with combined chlorine as well. But always check that to see if that's not a problem as well. In those heavy use pools, combined chlorine is a problem, and it's something that you have to be aware of as well. And I'll go back and touch again on a leak in the pool. This is something that will cause the chlorine level to drop rapidly and cause problems in the pool, because not only is the chlorine level dropping, but also the cyanuric acid is dropping. It's also going to, you're going to have higher pH in the pool because tap water usually has a pretty high pH in it, and your alkalinity may be going up as well. All these things really affect you trying to balance that pool, depending on how big the leak is. Sometimes you're losing an inch of water a week, sometimes 2 inches of water a week. A lot of these pools with these leaks have autofills. Sometimes the customer is adding water every other day to the pool. Whatever may be the case, a leak is something that needs to be addressed, because one thing that is going to happen is you're going to be using a lot more chlorine to maintain that pool. One thing to counter this during the time before the customer fixes it, because sometimes there's a big gap. You tell the customer, hey, you have a leak. I did the bucket test. You're actually losing about an inch of water a week. It's not normal evaporation because I did this test and I realized that, you're losing a lot more water than what you lose in evaporation. And you'll know in your area how much water actually evaporates out of the pool. In my area, typically in the summer, you're losing about an inch and a half of water each week from evaporation, which is a lot of water. But if you're losing 3 inches a week, then there's probably a leak in that pool. And if you do the test and find that there's a leak, this is the problem. So there's a gap sometimes between when the customer actually calls the leak detector out and they fix the leak. Sometimes the gap is the whole season because the customer doesn't want to spend the money. It's pretty expensive, and the fix is expensive as well in a lot of cases. And so what I do is I just buy a bucket of Cal Hypo, and I tell the customer, well, I'm using a lot of chlorine in the pool, and I just want you to know that I can't sustain that. And so I'm going to charge you for this 50-pound bucket, and I'm going to be adding it every week. And it may last the whole rest of the season. It may not. So just be aware that since the pool is leaking water, it's also leaking chlorine out of the pool, and I have to re-add it with this bucket. And so it's going to be something you have to pay for. And they're usually fine with that because they don't want to spend the money on the leak detection or fixing the problem immediately. And so I charge them for the chlorine, and I will use that to supplement the pool. So there are some solutions you can implement if the pool has a leak, if the customer doesn't want to fix it. But it's just a stopgap really until the winter time when chlorine demand goes down, and they can maybe address that leak and that problem. So these are some of the common things you run into out there. And of course, part 1, I focus on some other aspects. You can listen to that. And since it's a 2-part series, I think listening to both parts will really help you get a handle on those ugly pools out there on your pool route, those pools that you just can't seem to turn around. And looking for other podcasts, you can, of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel where these go up Monday through Friday. And also the podcast, you can subscribe there and you get the podcast episodes sent to you every day at midnight. It goes up every night and you'll get that sent to you. You go to my website as well, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, there's a podcast icon. And then if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.